Dear Father in heaven, we are thankful once again to be studying together. Though most of us are very distant from each other all over the world, we know, Lord, that we are close by your Spirit. And we know, Lord, that there is very little time in which to understand all these things. We just ask for your Spirit to speak to our hearts, to teach us, help us to touch on the most important points of our study, and help us, Lord, to understand these things so that we can share them with others. Thank you for each person. We pray for each family represented, and we just ask, Lord, that you can work in our lives in a powerful way. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, thanks for coming, everyone. So this is a continuation of the study of basically the three angels' messages. And last time we covered the first and second angel's message, or the first angel's message. Today we're going to cover the second angel's message. And we dealt with this line where we have this period of darkness. And then, of course, we have the time of the end, which is 1798. And we dealt with some of the elements, the increase of knowledge, which then in 1818, Miller is going to come to understand within about 25 years. So it's going to be, I'm not going to put a waymark here. I'm just going to say 1843, about the year 1843, that the end of the prophetic periods will happen, that Christ will wrap up this world's history. That's the way he understands it. So he knows there is this period of 25 years here. And we also know that his message is formalized, and sometimes we give different dates, 1831, sometimes 1833, depending on how we look at it. We know that he first publishes his message in this history. He first presents the message here in 1831. In 1833, he's made a minister of the Baptist Church. So sometimes we have different ways in which we understand this formalization of the message. And during this time here, of course, he's not presenting the message, he's just studying. So there's probably an increase of light here, but we mark the increase of light or the increase of knowledge here. And then we know that we also have August 11th, 1840, when the message is empowered. And we come to realize much, much later in our time that, and we're going to mark, of course, we know October 22nd, we're going to go through this history in 1844, is when the messages will end. Now, I'm going to mark here. So this is when the prophetic periods actually end. Where Miller finally comes to understand it, and I know we went through this, is there was different dates. Originally, he had December 31st, 1843 was the end of the prophetic periods. So this is the first way that he would have looked at it, because he just said about the year 1843, but it was sometime in the year 1843 that he believed the prophetic periods were going to end. And then he, in December of 1842, he came to recognize that the prophetic periods were going to end on March 21st, 1844. And then finally, the Millerites, not so much William Miller, but they examined the calendars and they came to pick the date April 18th at sunset. When I say at sunset, it's not really at the end of that day. So for some of them, it was midnight. For some of them, it was the next morning. That is, the Millerites were uncertain about when to count the start or the end of the day. So sunset, midnight, and sunrise were all possibilities. And so really on April 19th in the morning, Miller's prophecies had completely passed. And that's really the end of the first angel's message. Now, we had dealt with this empowerment of this message. So we dealt with Josiah Litch's prophecy in a little bit of detail, not in great detail. But the point about this is that this was an empowerment of the message. So we use some symbols. The first angel's message arrives. Here, the first angel is formalized. And then we're going to have the first angel empowered. But we know that the second angel is going to arrive. And where we mark that is April 19th, 1844. That's the arrival of the second angel. So this is the history that we want to study. And we know that, and we have touched on it in other studies, and we touched on a little bit, that Samuel Snow arrives in this history, and he actually arrives earlier than here. But I think the pivotal date is that he gives his personal testimony on December 31st, 1843. So before January 1st, 1844. He gives his testimony at the Boston Tabernacle. And he just rehearses the history of how he had come into the message. On January 1st, he decides that he's now going to present his view that Jesus isn't coming back in the spring of 1844, but that he's going to come back in the fall of 1844. And we're going to look at these passages here a little bit. We're going to address, because we have addressed to some degree how the Millerites looked at this, that they had this conception. And so when we look at Samuel Snow's letters, we'll see how that changed, how the ideas changed. And we also know that between here, this is the first day of the first month, and this is the 10th day of the 7th month. And between here is, if you count this as number 1, this is 187 days. So this is an important number. And this I've known for a long time. I just never knew the significance of 187. And we're gonna look at this in detail. We also have this date, August 11th, 1840. And we've found out that between these two dates, there's 1,533 days. And this becomes significant because this number is a wonderful manifestation of the power of God. But it also has other significances. If you take 153, as we're going to look at, we'll see that it has a significance as well that is related but separate from this idea of 1533. And 1533 is the year BC that the Exodus occurred. And it becomes a powerful symbol of the wonderful manifestation of the power of God. And Ellen White compares it from the history from 1840 to 1844, which she calls a wonderful manifestation of the power of God. And if we're going to look at the primary dates that we would start that, it would have to be August 11th when the message is empowered, and it would have to end on October 22nd at the Great Disappointment. So the fact that this is 1,533 days we saw is significant. And 1533 has a bunch of other characteristics to it, which I'm not really going to go in and explain, except that we know that if we take 1260 and we add 273, we get 1533 days. And which is, to me, pretty amazing that we can do that. So we just basically, you would just take from this this number. And this shows up in our history. So the 1260 and the 273 being a symbol of the Levites. And of course, this number here, either a symbol of the 2520 or a symbol of the scattering. There's lots of different ways in which it can be understood. But definitely it's a prophetic number. and so is this one. But that the two of them go together to make this number is pretty interesting. So there's going to be a lot of details as we go through this study slowly today. I just wanted to sort of look at what we have done and sort of look at what we're going to be studying. So it's really this history from December 31st, 1843 to October 22nd, 1844 that we're going to have to address. Now, I'm going to leave this line up here, just for a reference, and I'm going to draw the line here of the second angel's message down here. Now, when we have the second angel's message, and we dealt with some other concepts that we're going to address as we go on, but one is dealing with the different groups. So we know that this first group here, this testing message here, is first for the Protestants and then for the Millerites. That there's always two groups. So you have Protestants, and under the first angel's message, they're tested. And here, their probation closes. But we know then for the Millerites, they're going to be tested, and their probation is going to close here. So this first disappointment is for the Protestants, and the second disappointment is for the Millerites. Now, of course, the Millerites are disappointed here. So I'm not saying that necessarily Protestants felt any disappointment. But the thing is, their door has closed here, and the Millerites' door has closed here. And these two groups, when we look at them in our line, which we're going to eventually get to, we see that there's always these two groups. And we need to be able to identify what those two groups are. Now, we also have another group, let's say. In this line, it's not really a group, it's really one person, and that is Snow. And I think that we have failed to understand who Snow is, and we have tried to see him as a person in our line many times. People have come claiming to be Samuel Snow, symbolically, but that's an error. It's a misunderstanding of who Snow is. And so I'm going to try to get this idea, to show it, to prove it, so we can understand the significance of Snow in this history, so that we can understand the significance, what he symbolizes in our history. And I'll just say plainly, it is not a person. So is not typifying a single individual in our history. But because we haven't really well defined that, I think we have a problem with our lines, is that we make a mistake regarding our lines, regarding what the groups are that are being tested. And so, we're going to have to go through that. I don't know if we will get through it completely here, because I really want to also address Samuel Snow's letters in a little more detail, even though I've done them to some degree in some detail. I want to go slower or more slowly as I address Snow's letters. So as usual, I'm going to go over what we're going to see as we deal with Snow's letters. And where I'm going to start, I'm going to start actually on January 1st, 1844, because this is where Snow resolves that he's going to present that Jesus is going to be coming back in the fall. And we're going to be looking at all of his letters and understanding the symbolism of them. February 16th, so I don't need to really write 1844 in here. We know that's all when they occur. And this is his letter that's written. So this is when it's written. And this would be the first letter. And we're going to look at this, and we're going to look at the timing of this. But we also know that it was published on February 22nd. And I've found some more significance regarding February 22nd that was brought up by Bronwyn. This is Washington's birthday. But this is when it's published, and it's published in the Midnight Cry. Now, the Midnight Cry is a periodical that's published on Thursdays. And it's got an exclamation mark. So the Midnight Cry magazine, it's funded by Joshua V. Himes, but the editor is Southern. And so I don't know what I did here. So I don't know why I wrote a 2 there. That's his first letter. So that's when it's written. And this is going to be his first letter here. It's also going to be republished in the Signs. And that's going to be on April 3rd. And that's going to be, so in the Signs of the Times, it's going to be republished. And then we're going to have this date here, April 19th, the first disappointment. And so this is just the first disappointment. As we know, and then he's going to have, after the first disappointment, he's going to have a second letter, which is May 2nd. And this is going to be in the Midnight Cry magazine as well. And then he's going to have a third letter, which is June 22nd that it's written, and it's going to be published on June 27th. So this is his second letter. We don't know when it was written, and this one is going to be his third letter. And then finally, we will end up with his fourth letter, which is published on July 18th. And so this is written, published, and this time it's still going to be published in the Midnight Cry magazine. Oops. And then this one's also published in the Midnight Cry. Now this one has a writing date that is here, June 29th. So this is also when his fourth letter is written and published. And there's a significance in this, but it's of less significance than of all these other dates, but it's still significant when you're connecting this with 457 BC. And of course, that's part of the problem as we start to look at the significance of these dates. We're going to see that we need to understand the study that we did in the book of Ezra, dealing with the chronology of 457 BC, but also the chronology of the second decree. So we're going to have to refer back to that, even though we won't be able to do it in detail, but it is in other places. So in the studies on Ezra, we've done that. So the understanding of these letters, when we came to understand them, we have addressed the idea that this was in 2017 that we came to understand this. And the significance of 2017 is because we know we can get rid of the 0. So 2017 is 217. And 217 is the symbol for midnight. It's a symbol of the 27th day of July on one level, which is, which I don't have on here. But we will address that. I probably could have put October 22nd over here, just to give us more room, because we're going to have, halfway in between here. So if we have October 22nd, 1844, 10th day of the 7th month, we would have to extend these over here. Okay, so we're going to deal with the dates here in a little bit of detail, though this is about the second angel's message, which we're going to get into. But Samuel Snow's messages, even though it contains the second angel's message, is not when in none of this history has the second angel been empowered. The second angel has arrived, and we're going to look at this because we say the second angel arrives here, and trying to understand when an angel arrives. Like if you look here in 1798, we said the first angel arrives in 1798. But the problem that we have with that is that many people don't recognize that the first angel has arrived here. We know that Miller gets a concordance, and we know it's the time of the end. But in order to have an increase of knowledge, you have to have the time of the end. And so the increase of knowledge is in regard to the first angel. You couldn't have an increase of knowledge if the first angel hasn't arrived. And so, so when we look at this history here, and we're dealing with Samuel Snow's letters, Samuel Snow has a knowledge about the second angel's message. But the second angel message hasn't arrived till here, and yet he has this knowledge beforehand. And, I'm not sure if that, I understand it correctly, but, I have thought about it. I'm going to tell you what I think about it as we go through what this means. And there's different ways that we can look at it. I'm going to even go through historically some of the problems that we had when we dealt with this history initially, and then some of the solutions that Jeff came up with regarding it. Because I have to go through that history to explain what the struggle was about these letters. So that's 2017. So we have to deal with that history. And we'll try to do that in the second half more, though I'm always going to be referring to things that I'm going to be talking about later, because I think it helps people to learn about it and to sort of tie it together. So we need to understand these letters chronologically, what they mean. But we're doing that for a reason, because they have significance in 2017. And they tell us about where we are now, because I believe that these letters are telling us something about our history at the present time. And we haven't fully seen that. So we're focused upon our present time and upon the dates that we're involved in, but we need to come to recognize that those dates are connected with these letters. Because this is what these letters are about, is about our history, our time. So we have all these symbols. 2017 is a symbol about midnight. And to just address midnight, we all know about it. We know that halfway between April 19th and October 22nd, we have July 21st, and that's midnight. And that's Boston. So obviously we're going to address this second angel's message. But first I want to address this. So let's take a look at Samuel Snow's letters and this history. Now, in my paper, The Structure of Prophetic Chronology, I do have this in a sort of a different format than I'm doing it now, as far as how we're laying it out, how we're going through this. But I want to get through some of this background a little bit, just dealing with Ezra, even though we've done this before. And I have to allow myself here, just hang on. Okay, so we have in my notes here. Now, so part of this has to do with 457 BC. So I'm going back, obviously, if we've been doing the study on this, and so it's kind of in a different order than I would have liked to do it. So I'm going to address, let me see, all the way back here. So I'm not going to go through this part in detail, but I'm just going to address it and kind of point you to this. So it would start here is, and I talk about the two sticks being joined in the prophecy of Ezekiel 4. So in the notes that you have, I spend a bit of time going through Ezekiel, and Ezekiel 4 is at midnight. So we know that July 21st, 1844 is the 5th day of the 4th month. And Ezekiel is begins his prophesying on July 21st, 592 BC, on the 5th day of the 4th month. And that became very significant understanding. And that was understood, I'm not sure exactly when, definitely before 2016, but it became much more significant as I was studying Ezekiel in 2016 and came to understand the prophecy of the 390 and the 40 days and the starting point. So I'm not going to go into that study there. I'm not going to go through that because we've done that in other places. The only thing that we can say is that Ezekiel is making a prediction. And the prediction that he's making is regarding the destruction of Jerusalem. And we know that the destruction of Jerusalem becomes this symbol, the 10th day of the 5th month, in which Jerusalem was destroyed in 586 and in 70 AD, becomes a symbol for the destruction of Jerusalem that can be applied in our time. And so, again, I've done many studies on that, and those can be seen other places. But the point is that he's making this prediction regarding this date. Now, when we put that date in our history, we come to July 18th, Julian, which is July 31st, Gregorian, and that's the 10th day of the 5th month in 2020. And so that's where the symbol of the destruction of Jerusalem brings us in our history. And that July 18th, I'm making the argument that July 18th is a symbol of the prediction before midnight. It is July 18th, as you're going to see, is this symbol about this prediction. So when Ezekiel's making this prediction, he's predicting the destruction of Jerusalem in 586. But he also ends up inadvertently, at least on probably in his thinking, of predicting the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. But he is also predicting the destruction of Jerusalem in the year 2020 because of the symbol and the way that we can connect Ezekiel to our history, which I'm not going to be able to do here. But that date that he's ultimately predicting is a July 18th date in our history. Happens to be a Julian date, but it still is July 18th. So that's one piece of the puzzles that has to be understood. And so I deal with this in our notes, and I go through that, deal with the destruction of Jerusalem. But the other thing is he makes this prediction starting on the 5th day of the 4th month. That is, he's starting at midnight. So midnight becomes this date that he's there symbolizing. And we know that the first date in Ezekiel, in chapter 1, verse 1, and the last date, chapter 40, verse 1, chapter 40, verse 1 is October 22nd, 573 BC, and it's the 10th day of the 7th month. And we know that that parallels October 22nd, 1844, which is also the 10th day of the 7th month. And we know that his first date is July 21st, the 5th day of the 4th month. Now, to somebody who doesn't know and understand the biblical calendar, they might just think that the 5th day of the 4th month is always July 21st, and that the 10th day of the 7th month is always October 22nd. But that's not the case. It's only one in 30 times that those dates align. And the fact that they align in Ezekiel shows that Ezekiel is typifying Samuel Snow. So what happens in Millerite history, Samuel Snow is tied to the 5th day of the 4th month, to midnight, and he's predicting October 22nd, 1844. Now, Ezekiel's not predicting October 22nd, 1844, but he is making a prediction. And so we can tie that prediction of Ezekiel to the prediction of snow. So the two are tied together because they have those two symbols in Ezekiel's book in a very unlikely combination that you're going to have these two dates starting and ending Ezekiel. It's very unlikely that they're going to be the same dates. Now, so I talk a bit about that in my notes. So I'm not reading through these notes right now. And we know that midnight, which we talked about on the board there, that's in between April 19th and October 22nd, 1844, was a presentation that Samuel Snow did at the Boston Tabernacle. Now, Loughborough misplaces this and he places it at Exeter. But if it was at Exeter, his statement would be inexplicable, because at Exeter, they weren't in the tarrying time 3 months, as he says in the statement. They were in the tarrying time 4 months. So he wouldn't have made this statement. And the statement, which I always like to read, Brother Snow thus questioned them, where are we in our Advent experience? Answer from the audience, in the tarrying time. So this tarrying time is the period from April 19th to when the prophetic periods are going to end. And they know that they're in this tarrying time, but they don't know at that time when the prophetic periods are ending. So he asked the question, how long was the vision to tarry? And they say until midnight. So now he's going to use some Millerite logic here, which is very sound. What is a day in prophecy? Everyone knows, they say, a year. When would a night be? Then what would a night be? So a night would be half a day. So they answer 6 months. And what would midnight be? They answer 3 months. How long have we been in the tarrying time? The answer is just 3 months. He said, then it is just the midnight now, and I am here with the midnight cry. In a few sentences, he explained that it was the fall of 457 that the decree went forth, and so they were short 6 months in their reckoning, showing them that the 2300 days would terminate October 22nd, 1844, instead of the spring as they had previously supposed. Then in a strong voice he said, behold, the bridegroom cometh on the 10th day of the 7th month, October 22nd, 1844, go ye out to meet him. Now, of course, this is not necessarily his exact words. One is he didn't know that October 22nd, 1844 was the 10th day of the 7th month. He actually never made that prediction of October 22nd. That was made by others based upon their understanding of the biblical calendar. So he is just saying on the 10th day of the 7th month. Ellen White, as we notice, she says that this cry was made midway between when Miller's prophecies ended and the 2300 days actually ended, the prophetic periods ended. So if we take this midway of Ellen White, she must be referring to Boston, because she says it was in the very words of the parable, behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. And that was in Boston. And we find out that this is in Boston by reading other writings. So we read Joseph Bates, who places this. He says about July 20th, but it was on July 21st, we find, by looking at the history of Snow's travels, that Froome brings out. So we know that it was on July 21st. It was on a Sunday morning service that he was given. And we believe that it was because of his publishment of his last letter on July 18th, 3 days before, that people would have had this opportunity then to invite him. They would say, okay, here's Brother Snow. This happens to be in town, and because he was just passing through Boston, and so he was presenting this message in Boston. So there's a lot of background information that took time to dig up. It wasn't just something that was sitting on the surface. So most Adventists came to understand that, Exeter was where this happened, based on Loughborough's testimony. But Loughborough wasn't there. He based it on other people's testimonies. Now, we also did a study at other times dealing with Ezra, the chronology of the book of Ezra, and 457 BC. And in the story of the book of Ezra, we have some really important dates. And so we're going to look at these. I'm not going to go through the study here, but we will look at them as we look in relationship to Samuel Snow's letters. So I'm going to go back to the board here. Now, the first part, and we addressed this when we did Ezra, but there's this first letter, which is written February 16th, and it's published February 22nd. We'll deal with this one later, even though we've already dealt with it in other places. But it's this first publishing, so here it's going to be published for the first time and then published for the second time. And the Midnight Cry published on Thursday, the Signs published on Wednesday. You cannot control when you're going to have your letter that you wrote on February 16th published. But even then, Snow had no idea about the biblical calendar and how it worked. He wouldn't have known the significance of any of these dates. He could not have decided, I'm going to publish it here and publish it there. But when we go to Ezra chapter 6, let's write this up here. So Ezra 6, we have the dedication of the temple. And the dedication of the temple, to me, was an extremely powerful symbol. This happens in 515 BC. And the date that's given is the third day of the 12th month in the 6th year of Darius. And this third day of the 12th month is interesting because in 515 BC, that date happens to be the third month, 12th day on the Julian calendar. That is, it's March 12th, 515 BC. And so this to me was rather interesting when I first saw this, that this date is an inversion of the day and the month, but it still has the same numbers. And this is very unlikely to occur with a date, that you're going to take a biblical date that it's going to line up in this way. I tried to figure out how often it would happen, and I figure it would happen less than 2% of the time. Exactly how many, that you could find any date on it in a year that's going to line up like this. Might be slightly more if I include the rabbinic calendar in here, but I'm just using the biblical calendar. So it doesn't happen very often. It's just not a very likely thing to occur, but it does occur here. So anyway, we have this symbol here. So I recognized this back in 2014 that there was this symbol, but I didn't know what it meant. But I knew it meant something. And then in Ezra 6, you're going to find that after they dedicate the temple, they're going to have a Passover. And the Passover is roughly, it's roughly 40 days, 41 days, depending on if you're going to go from the 12th month, third day, and you're going to count to the 14th day of the first month. Now, it just so happens that this is the Passover where his first letter is published for the second time. And so what this does is it ties this 515 BC with this symbol, the 14th day of the first month, which is the Passover, and it ties this history together. So it's very unlikely that he's going to have a letter published on the dedication of the temple and then have it published on the date of the Passover. Now, of course, this date of the Passover here is not the correct date of the Passover in 1844. If you remember that for many people, the first day of the first month would have been March 21st. That's what Miller had chosen for the end of the Jewish year 1843. And that's because the Jews actually had the first day of the first month in 1843 as March 21st. And if you count from March 21st to April 3rd, you'll find that this ends up being the 14th day of the first month. So this ends up being the Passover that the Jews kept, and the Karaite Jews as well. So the rabbinic Jews and the Karaite Jews in 1844, they kept this day, April 3rd, as the Passover. So that deals with the dates of his first letter. Now, we then have this April 19th is a division between his first letter and his second letter. So his second letter is now published after the first disappointment. But it's published, if this is the first day of the first month, May 2nd becomes the 14th day of the first month. So this is the true Passover. This ends up being the 14th day of the 13th month, because they would have added an extra month, which they would do if the beginning of the year is going to be, because they have to wait for the first full moon or the first new moon after the spring equinox. And it's too soon. March 21st would mean on the 20th, you would have to see the first visible crescent. And the 21st would be the first day of the first month. But the equinox had not passed according to the Jewish reckoning. So that means you have to add this extra month. So April 19th becomes the first day of the first month, which we know, and this is of course true, if you're going to have October 22nd being the 10th day of the 7th month, you need April 19th as the first day of the first month. So then his second letter is published. Now, we dealt with it other places in detail, but I recommend that people read the letter and read what he's writing about. In this letter, he's referring to a document called the death decree of Pontius Pilate's death decree regarding when Jesus is crucified. It's a fake document, but he uses this to, and for some reason I don't even understand how he does it. His argument is not correct, but he has Jesus crucified in 31 AD. And so he presents this chiasm for the first time in Millerite history that has 3.5 years and 3.5 years, with Christ being crucified in the middle in 31 AD. And of course, this becomes very significant. So he has made these arguments, but so far he has not introduced how to address the end of the 70 weeks. Because one of the problems that Miller had is that Miller ended the 70 weeks on the 12th day of the first month in 33 AD, believing that Jesus was crucified on the 12th day of the first month in 31 AD. So he ends them on the 12th day of the first month He believes that Ezra left, and Ezra did, leave Babylon, the river Ahava, on the 12th day of the first month in 457, and that Jesus then would have been crucified exactly 490 years to the day on the 12th day of the first month in 33 AD. So he had Jesus crucified at the end of the 70th week, but he also did not account for the fact there was no 0 year. So Samuel Snow has to address this point. And you can see the problem is that Miller had made a number of mistakes. One of them was the 70 weeks. And he had a specific date for the 70 weeks, which I find odd, because he knew that the 70 weeks, in his mind, started in 457 on the 12th day of the first month, and he had them end exactly to the day, mistakenly believing Jesus was crucified 2 days before the Passover, which really makes no sense, and was not corrected, as far as I can tell, by any of his opponents or by any other Millerites until Snow comes along. So here, when Snow comes up with this idea of this chiasm, which he doesn't really talk about it as being a chiasm, but it is, that Jesus is and he doesn't really he deals with John the Baptist's ministry as the start. I don't believe he has the stoning of Stephen as the end. I can't remember now if he did in this letter. But he definitely has him crucified in the midst of the 70th week. So he has this ending in 34 AD, and he has Jesus crucified in 31 AD. And this now in this second letter, this is adding to what he has already done. So it's a letter that's adding to that information regarding October 22nd, 1844. Now, in 2017, this May 2nd letter, even though we knew about Samuel Snow's first letter, that one was well known for a long time. But this letter was chosen by Tabo, even though he wasn't the one who came up with it. Somebody else did, but Tabo was the one promoting it. That May 2nd was the prediction before midnight. So this idea of this prediction before midnight was the idea that we were going to make a prediction. And this was already understood, that we were going to make a prediction. Now, in 2017, we still had some sketchy ideas about our lines. So this idea about what midnight was, how it was going to be represented, had not fully come to view, but we did have in 2017, on January 14th, we had introduced the idea of Raphia and Penium. So in 2014, we are now getting closer to understanding, to some degree, midnight and the midnight cry. So we already had midnight introduced in late in 2015, in December of 2015, and this idea that we were going to make a prediction had been introduced. So now we have this prediction before midnight. Now, do you guys have any questions? It's all making sense. Mm-hmm. So So we have this prediction before midnight, and this is the date that's chosen. And I've tried to figure out exactly when this occurred, but because a lot of videos have been taken down, I can't actually nail down this date. But I do know it was in March. So in March was when this idea of the PBM, as far as I can tell, was first introduced. It could have been a bit earlier. It could have been maybe a bit later. I think it was around March 24th, but I can't prove it. I don't have any documentation to that effect. So if anybody knows when we can find that when this was first dealt with, that would be helpful. One of the things is my email account that I used to have when I was at the university was deleted, so I can't look back at my emails at that time. So I can't check my emails, but some people may be able to do that. Now, we also have then a third letter and a fourth letter. So when this was found out, we only knew of the two letters, and some other people took some time to dig these up. I know I dug up one of them, and I think I probably dug up the June 22nd letter on my own, though somebody else may have picked it out as well. But I know that somebody else did pick out July 18th letter. So his fourth letter, I think, was found by somebody else. Now, these, of course, are giving more information regarding his prediction. So they're additional information. This one here is in our notes. If we go to Samuel Snow's letters, the Three Angels Messages source book. So and oops, I ended up sharing the wrong thing here. Just didn't click on it properly. So I'm going to have all Snow's letters. We went through the letters in another study. There's the May 2nd letter. And this is the June 22nd letter. You can see it's published June 27th. And here he's making more arguments regarding the 7 times, the 2,300 days. So it's just more additional information. And there's another article called The Midst of the Week that's not written by him, but it shows that there is this understanding of the midst of the week that's also introduced on this date, June 22nd, by another writer. And so June 27th. June 22nd is the dating of that letter, as you can see. And then his July 18th letter is called Confirming the Covenant, which becomes significant as well. This idea of understanding of the covenant and what he's setting forth in this letter is pretty important in the context of what he's predicting. And you can see it's written on June 29th, 1844. And I could actually do a whole study just dealing with the contents of these letters, reading through them and discussing them, but we don't really have time to do that. But I suggest that people do that. They read through these letters because the content of the letter is just as important, or maybe even in some ways more important than the timing. You know, as you can see, like the May 2nd letter, if you didn't know that it was connected to, you know, if you didn't know the content of it, it wouldn't really even matter. So now we have all these letters laid out, and you know, and we did do this in another place as well. So in trying to understand what happened in 2017, we know that this was picked as the prediction before midnight, but we had Dwayne Dewey, who took this letter, which I think Tanya found, the July 18th letter, and he started promoting it as the prediction before midnight. Now, I'm not really sure why it mattered in the sense of why would it matter if you talk about the May 2nd letter or whether you talk about the July 18th letter. I mean, they're all predictions before midnight. The first letter is, the second letter is, the third letter is, the fourth letter is. So that was a problem. But Tabo had presented the prediction before midnight. He used the story of the butler and the baker in Genesis, where they had their dream, and 3 days later, their dream was fulfilled. And he used that as a symbol of the prediction before midnight, 3 days. There was another one, which I can't remember. And then there was also Ezra, where he took the 3 days that they tarried at the river Ahava as also a symbol of the prediction before midnight. So to me, there seemed to be a lot of significance in that July 18th is 3 days before midnight. So I also agreed with Dwayne Dewey that July 18th was a symbol of the prediction before midnight. Now, but as we started to look at these letters, I saw that there was this symbolic relationship between these dates and when they were published, which to me seemed to be more significant than trying to argue over which one was the prediction before midnight. It didn't seem to me to be helpful because we weren't really even understanding why May 2nd. Now, in 2017, we're not predicting the timing of any event in the future. We have already looked at timing of events in the past and saw that they had structure to them and that there were significant dates and that they could be connected to the prophetic periods in the past. But we weren't trying to say, well, on May 2nd in some year, something's going to happen. So we weren't picking these dates, July 18th or May 2nd, for any symbolic reason regarding that date itself. It was just seemed to be a battle over who was right, which I thought was a little bit odd. So in my study of it, what I wanted to understand is what I saw is I put these in lines because I had understood the biblical calendar. So I recognized that this was Passover and that this was the false Passover. And I saw April 19th in the middle. So this showed me that there was two classes being represented. One who had accepted the light, this group here, they would have accepted the light of the calendars, of the change from the extra month being added so that you could have October 22nd as the 10th day of the 7th month rather than September 23rd, which would have been the Day of Atonement, which the rabbinic Jews had used and the Karaite Jews, if you had followed the rabbinic calendar. So to choose October 22nd means that in this history here, you were accepting new light, right? To accept. Now, they weren't thinking about that this is the Passover, when Samuel Snow's letter's published, because they're not even seeing the significance of his letter when it's published. So this May 2nd letter has significance because it's unforeseen in that sense. But it's also representing what I would say back at that time is this is the true priests, and this is the false priests. These are the wheat and the tares. This is the wheat, this is the tares. And that these letters symbolize this separation, as we said, Protestants and Millerites. So if you're a Protestant and you're not accepting this new light, you're still going to accept that April 3rd was the Passover and September 23rd was the Day of Atonement. And you'll see Protestants who still make that claim regarding 1844. They say Adventists were wrong. October 22nd was not the Day of Atonement. And they prove it both with Karaite and Jewish rabbinic information to show that in 1844, no Jews were observing October 22nd as the Day of Atonement, and that they observed April 3rd as the Passover. So they didn't accept that insertion of the 13th month in 1844. But this group here, of course, they have accepted that. So there's one I saw, from being a chronologist, I say chronology is making the difference here. You have one group who's rejecting the chronology and another who's accepting the chronology. And that's going to make this distinction between these two groups. Because I saw that chronology always ended up being an issue. in this movement. Since 2014, people leaving the movement were leaving over the issue of chronology. Now, so this division, I could see that if we were going to parallel it with our history, we already paralleled April 19th as the first day of the first month. But I could see that there's a problem here. If we look at our line, we would say, well, this is the first day of the first month is 9/11, right? So then you would say, well, how does this apply, this group of people here? Because we're looking at a separation between two different classes. Now, you could argue that there is a separation that occurs at 9/11. And that separation would be from the organized church, light that has come, and now this group of people that is proclaiming this message. And trying to understand that, I think, has been one of the big problems that we've had in this message. Because if we're going to look at two groups, Protestants and Millerites, we have to understand then what are the two groups in our history? How are they going to be represented? Are we going to use April 19th, which is the first day of the first month, which is 9/11, as a separation between these two groups? We haven't done it that way. We look at our line that we have a separation between two groups. And for Adventists, and as we're going to see, that separation, that close of probation, is going to occur at the Sunday law. So the waters become a little bit muddied as we start to look at this prediction before midnight. We're trying to understand it. Now, the other thing that happened in 2017 is I presented Samuel Snow's letters at the School of the Prophets in the fall, in September. And this letter here was very significant to me. So the third letter, the significance of this one is the sixth day of the third month. And the sixth day of the third month is Pentecost. But it's also tied to June 22nd. And June 22nd, at that time, I didn't know the significance of June 22nd, but June 22nd has become a powerful symbol in our line. We know that June 22nd in 217 BC is the Battle of Raphia, which we mark as midnight. And it has the symbol of 217, which is a symbol of midnight, July 21st. So 2117 can symbolize 21st day of the seventh month. But we also have this symbol of June 22nd. And June 22nd, as we've done in other studies, we know that Enoch was born on 6:22 a.m. Anno Mundi, from the creation of the world. We know also that 622 BC is 30 years before Ezekiel presents on the fifth day of the fourth month, and he refers to it, that he's in the 30th year, so he's referring to 622 BC. And we also know that July 18th, 622, is the start of the Islamic calendar, 622 AM, or not AM, AD. So it's also July 18th. So so that 622 symbol shows up again and again. It's also the Battle of Pydna, 49 years after the Battle of Raphia. It's also June 22nd. And June 22nd shows up in our line with the School of the Prophets on these significant dates. So June 22nd becomes this powerful symbol of this movement. And we also saw that June 22nd and June 27th are connected together. They're connected together in Ezekiel's history because he uses 627 BC for the start of the 40 years from Ezekiel 4. And he also uses June or 622 BC for the 30 years. And so they become tied together as a symbol. And there's other ways we've tied them together. In our history, we have June 22nd, and we have a June 27th on our line as well. June 27th, 2020, that's coming, which is 21 days, which is a symbol of midnight, before July 18th. So there just becomes all these different symbols for June 22nd. But for me, the significance in 2017 was just that it was Pentecost. And in my naivety, what I was looking at is that I said, well, here we've just passed the prediction before midnight, and now we must be in Pentecost. And so, we must have had these two separation of these two classes. We know that we had in 2017, we had a separation that occurred. Group of people left. And so I'm at School of the Prophets in September, and I'm saying we must be at Pentecost. God must be doing this work of uniting his people, this work of organization, which had already begun at Italy in 2017. They had organizational meetings in Italy. So, there was all this symbolism about organization, and Pentecost to me symbolized that. The Holy Spirit organizing God's people. Now, of course, there was the other thing which to me was tied them together was the Gordian knot, as I call it, where June 27th, the day that the letter is published, because it's written on June 22nd, the biblical date is the 11th day of the third month, and that if it's doubled, it becomes 22/6, which would be June 22nd. So I could tie the publishment of the letter on June 27th with the date that the letter was written in this very connecting the biblical and the Gregorian calendars. But also a doubling, and a doubling is the symbol of midnight. So I could see that the symbols of midnight were here, the doublings were here, and that all of these letters then must be about the prediction before midnight. But my focus was more on July 18th. But I had to find a way to tie all these together. I didn't want to just take July 18th and ignore this whole structure. So the way this happened is that, I'm going to get rid of this here. Let's get rid of this. Just give me some room. So I recognized that all of these dates were significant in some way. Even June 29th, that's in 457 BC, June 29th is the day that's Pentecost. So I could even tie this date to this date. So I could see that June 29th was significant. The only date I couldn't find any significance was February 16th, which to me was a problem because I have publishing and writing of these letters that are significant, but I have this one that's written here. Sure, I have two publishing, so I can say it's significant, but I just thought there was a problem. And so in a dream, I ended up being told to double the date. So what I did is I took February 16th and I took it as a symbol of 2 months and 16 days. And I added that to February 16th, and that brought me to May 2nd. So if you add 2 months to February 16th, it goes March, April, so it would go to April 16th. And then I would add 16 days to April 16th, and that will bring me to May 2nd. And then I was told to double it again. And so when I did that, I also had 2 months and 16 days added to May 2nd, which you can readily see is July 18th. This meant that May 2nd was the center of this chiasm. It put a little more emphasis on May 2nd as well, because May 2nd becomes the key. The center of the chiasm is not the most important date in a chiasm, but it is the most important date in regard to defining the chiasm. It tells you a lot of things about what the chiasm is about, but often it's the key that unlocks the chiasm itself that you can even see it's a chiasm. Obviously, if I just counted the number of days here and I had nothing in the center, I don't really have a chiasm, right? I don't, in this case, I don't. But this date here becomes a key. And the fact that it's the cross of Christ, which unlocks this chiasm, shows that this is an extremely important chiasm. That this isn't just some chiasm, but it's actually tied to this chiasm, which is the key that unlocks all prophecy. So May 2nd becomes this extremely important date. And I emphasize this because I'm trying to make peace with Tabo, saying, don't fight over the July 18th or the May 2nd, because you can see that your May 2nd is important. But of course, it was disregarded. This fight continued. And this eventually was all rejected by both parties. Both Dwayne Dewey and Tavel no longer accept any significance in any of these letters or any of these dates as having anything to do with the prediction before midnight or midnight at all. So, which is a sad reality that somebody would do that. Now, where my emphasis still was on July 18th, and so on September 23rd, 2017 at Lambert Church, I presented Samuel Snow's letters in a very brief way because I only had time for a sermon. But my emphasis was July 18th. So this is when I first presented in a public way the whole structure, and I had done some in the class. But my emphasis here on September 23rd was the July 18th as a symbol of the prediction before midnight. Now, we know that we have a prediction regarding July 18th, 2020. And so my view is that July 18th is not just a symbol of the prediction before midnight, it's the date that we are actually predicting. Now, in trying to understand this, then the evolution, for lack of a better word, or the growth that I had in understanding this, I need to jump ahead a little bit further, and that's to 2018. So Elder Jeff saw this, he knew about the presentation of this, and he saw there was significance in it. But in 2018, he began to present Samuel Snow's letters. He started to realize that there was more to it than what we had understood before. Now, we were just at that time also introducing the idea that we could set dates. But Jeff wasn't trying to set dates with it. He was trying to establish something about Samuel Snow's letters and the importance of them. Not sure what his ultimate goal was. But he could see that we were coming to midnight and that these letters had something to do with it. So he was presenting these letters, and I was presenting the week of Christ. So he was presenting this, and I was presenting this. I was presenting the 70th week, and I was presenting the literal 70th week, the actual time from when Jesus would have been, baptized, when he would have been crucified, the exact date when the stoning of Stephen happened, and putting them into a literal calendar on our calendar, not just a symbolic 2520. We came to realize that it's actually 2570 days from the baptism to the stoning of Stephen. So, but I found that was significant, that I'm presenting this and Jeff is presenting this. So we're really presenting the same thing, but we're not focused upon setting a date yet. Now, there's a bunch of other history in regard to this that, we had abandoned the prediction before midnight, even though I hadn't, but other people had. So nobody was talking about it. There was all this new stuff happening. There was a maneuvering of the lines, of trying to understand the line of the priests, the Levites, the Nethinims, the 144,000 that was happening in Italy in 2018. There was also, of course, this new date that was going to be presented, which was November 9th, 2019. And so back in 2017, of course, I don't see any of that. We're not trying to predict dates with any of this. But in 2018, as I'm presenting the week of Christ, I'm starting to recognize that we can project dates into the future. And so I've done that presentation other places, dealing with the literal week of Christ. And what ends up happening is all these things come together. And so I'm going to have to show you, I guess, as we get into that history in the second part. I'll have to show you how this all connects, because we really do need to understand this prediction before midnight. I believe that it was fulfilled. I believe it was a correct understanding that Samuel Snow's represented this prediction before midnight, and that this prediction before midnight came about before midnight in this movement. And yet this was about the midnight and the midnight cry, and yet this was to a large degree ignored or rejected. So even the people who had originally proposed this came to reject it, but pretty much everybody, the leadership, everyone rejected this concept that we could predict in the way that we were predicting, or the date that we were predicting. And that date is July 18th. So I'm going to have to try to go through that. Now, since I have some people here, is this making sense? Am I going through this too quickly, or do you think you're following it? I know it's warm in here.
No, following.
Okay. Yeah, and I think, a lot of people have seen some of this before.
Yeah.
I think the main thing that I'm trying to bring out is some other points regarding the significance of this prediction before midnight, and to see how this is now tying into our history. Because I believe May 2nd is still an important date in 2020. It's past, and something that we missed. People had pointed me to it. I sort of ignored it. Even though I have looked at May 2nd in 2019, I believe that this is a significant date in our line and tells us some things. So I hate to erase this all. Well, we got pictures of it. That's not a problem. It's just I'm going to have to refer back to some of this. So what I'll do is I'll erase the top. Okay, he's going to take a picture. Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to erase the top up here. I might have to end up drawing it back again. Because that to me is sort of what we're studying, is we're studying the first, second, and third angels' messages and trying to understand them in Millerite history. But I want to address what happened in our history and the relationship then. Well, I guess we can go back to July, I believe it's June 2nd, 2017. So June 2nd, 2017 is the Italian camp meeting. So it's Italy. I don't know if I can get this all in here. But we have this camp meeting in Italy in 2017. And so we're beginning this work of organization. And to me, it's significant that it's happening at this time where in 2017, we're talking about this prediction before midnight. Now it's getting pushed aside even in 2017. In 2017, Parminder saw my presentation. I had a discussion with him regarding the prediction before midnight. He dismissed it all. He dismissed Samuel Snow's letters. But in 2017, we have this organizational meeting happening. And it's going to be followed by another organizational meeting. And we're going to mark June 9th. So this is the end of this. This is Italy as well. And what happens here in significance is that we have a prayer that commences Sabbath. And the date is the 6th day of the 3rd month. So this is Pentecost. And I'm doing this from memory. Hopefully I'm not getting this wrong. So this is going to be a Sabbath at 9:11 p.m. that Elder Jeff is going to, reportedly, after speaking for 120 minutes, though it was interrupted with technical difficulties, but he closes the meeting, which is opening the Sabbath at 9:11 p.m., and that happens to be the exact time of sunset in this place, Torre or something, Italy. So he closes Pentecost. He's opening the Sabbath at 9:11 p.m. at sunset, and this was seen as significant when it happened. He kneels down to pray at 9:11 p.m. or gets up from prayer or something. 9:11 p.m. is marked here, and it was noted. Now, On June 9th in Italy again, he's going to, so I'm just going to write here, he's going to open the Sabbath. Here he's going to close the Sabbath. He's going to close the Sabbath. But it's again at 9:11 p.m. and it's unintentional on Jeff's part to pray at 9:11 p.m., but it's recognized. Now, the Sabbath on this date, it's a week apart, it's a slightly different time. But, the Sabbath, how you determine it is not exact anyway. But the fact that his prayer happens at 9:11, we can still say that this is happening at sunset. So it's going to be sunset, even though I can't remember exactly how different it is from June 2nd to June 9th. But it's a little bit different in time. It's a few minutes difference. But at least these times were both marked in regard to his prayer. Now, we're going to come back to this. So we have these two 9/11s that become significant. Now, at this camp meeting, Daniel from Brazil has seen significance regarding a date. So he knows that there's going to be this date that's going to be proclaimed because they introduce, and I believe it's on June 10th. Stephen might correct me regarding that, but it's on the Sunday that they start talking in an organizational meeting. Some people say it's part of the camp meeting. Not sure about that, but they start talking about time setting. It's introduced, and there was problems recording the meeting and different things happening. But Elder Jeff accepted this idea that we could time set based on Parminder's arguments. So this is 2018. And Daniel from Brazil, on July 27th, he makes a prediction. He counts from here to here, October 13th, 2018. He counts 126 days. Now, he actually counts 126 days ordinally, but as he counts from June 10th to October 13th is 126 days. I count from June 9th, 126 days cardinally. That is, I count this as day 0. June 10th would be day 1. And if you're counting ordinally, June 10th is day 1. So we're taking a different date, but we're still coming to the same dates. Now, and of course, he makes this prediction on July 27th. I need to move it over here a bit. Now, he tells us about this on October 3rd. So I'm just going to put this down here, October 3rd. This is prayer meeting. It's a Wednesday at the School of the Prophets. And he tells us about this prediction that he made on July 27th, that on October 13th, the midnight cry would be given for the priests. And he thought that it would be Tess Lambert preaching at Lambert Church, or maybe Parminder Byatt. But he finds out here on October 3rd that he's going to be the one giving the sermon 10 days later, which he's not happy about, because it doesn't seem to him that this prediction is being fulfilled of the 126 days. Now, the other thing is that Tess has presented on this date 2 sermons. One's called The Midnight Cry, and the other is called 10 Years. And this is where she doesn't say that November 9th, 2019 is Raphia or the close of probation, but she leaves it for us to figure out, and everybody recognizes what she's saying, that she's predicting a date over here, November 9th. Now, when she does this presentation, during the day, she does 2 presentations, and then in the evening, they're discussing this whole issue, dealing with some of the implications of her study dealing with the 2 streams of information. That's really the hot issue, not even this date. They're discussing other issues that are going to be contentious, that Jeff recognizes will be contentious. But here, when I looked at her methodology, she used these spans of time, like 490 years, and she would divide that in half, so that would be the half of that, and all these different spans of time. to come up to November 9th, or to come up to 2019. And each of these years had different events. Like I know the one here that was 490 years before would have been, what would that be?
The Protestant Reformation?
Yeah, it's Reformation. What's the year? That would be
1529.
1529. Yeah, no, 490 years. 1529. And there was a bunch of things that happened here, but this is where they first called Protestants. So they're suggesting there's going to be a name change. There's a whole bunch of things that happen here. And what they suggest is that all those events that happened in that year are going to be repeated in this year. But some of these events and some of these dates are connected with November 9th. And so the suggestion is that on November 9th, we're going to have all of these events happen, right? So November 9th, 2019. Of course, not many people realize that I was opposed to this as far as the methodology, I believe, was wrong. It wasn't the correct way to come to November 9th, that it wasn't line upon line, and that she was cherry picking events, and that I didn't expect those events to be fulfilled. What I did know is that there was going to be a separation between two classes. So I came to recognize that this was midnight for the priests, and that there was going to be this separation that was going to occur within this movement. That was what I said privately many times, but I also implied it in my presentations at the camp meeting in October of 2018. But I don't think people caught it because I wasn't being as clear maybe as I should have been of what I thought. But I did talk about what I thought, that first off is that it would only be the false priests that would have their probation closed. So anyway, she did all this methodology. So I'm here on October 3rd. I see that. I'm not very convinced. But I was intrigued by this prediction of Daniel with the July 27th date, because I saw this as a symbol of Islam. That comes from July 27th, 1299. And
Brazil.
Yeah, from Brazil, Daniel from Brazil. So to me, that was significant. But I did some math as well. So at noon, so this is at noon, and Tess had presented the miracle at Fatima, which is October 13th at noon. October 13th is also the fall of Babylon at midnight. And there's other significances in October 13th. In Millerite history, it's the first day of the 7th month. Anyway, when we deal with this October 13th at noon, what I did is I did a simple calculation. I wanted to know how long it was from noon while I'm at Lambert Church, hearing Daniel presenting his sermon, where he mentions, this 126 days, and I found that it was 391.5 days. So to me, this was extremely significant because I knew that we had already tied Ezekiel and Josiah Litch together. And Ezekiel's prophecy, even though it's 390 days, it's also a year and a half from the siege that he's marking to the destruction of the temple or Jerusalem. It's 391.5. And that I could take this symbol, the 390 years of Josiah Litch's prophecy, and see the 15 days as 0.5 of a month. So there was this connection between Josiah Litch and Ezekiel, and the fact that I could use Josiah Litch's prophecy that this is predicting this, that on October 13th, this is going to happen, and the date that's being promoted is November 9th, that this was extremely unlikely to be chance. Now, in further analysis, we came to realize that this 126 days could be divided in 63 and 63 days, with August 11th as the center. So that's another symbol from Josiah Litch's prophecy. We have the start and we have the end of Josiah Litch's prophecy. And this structure here becomes a part of a bigger structure now that we understand, that connects November 9th. And that structure has to do with the next time I'm at noon doing a calculation, is I'm here on September 7th. And September 7th is 9/7. 9 times 7 is 63. And so I recognize that this period of time here, when Jeff gets up and he does a sermon against this new movement. And this becomes extremely significant, this 63, 2 periods of 63 days. And he comes to understand that January 11th, 2020 is the end of this 126 days. So you have this 126 days here. That's part of this structure. And there becomes, even greater significance, and I'm not going to go through all that, but even the center of this period of time becomes significant. It ties in together what we call the Levitical chiasm. This is the midnight chiasm. So what we see is starts to get very complicated. It starts to become all these dates, all these numbers, and so I'm not expecting that everybody's going to, just you need to draw these out and think about them. I think telling the story behind them helps, and understanding the story is important. You may always have to refer to notes if you're not good at remembering dates, but you need to know the stories of these Passovers, or not Passovers, but these Sabbaths. And the other thing is, when we looked at this date, June 22nd, we found that we could count 391 days, 391.5 days from here to here. And this would bring us to, if I remember correctly, June, well, it would have been June 15th. What's that, Stephen?
I think it's June 28th, but then on the
Right, but it's June 15th on the Julian calendar.
yeah, maybe is it maybe 29th or something? It's near the end of June.
Well, but anyway, I use the Julian.
Yeah, 20th. Yeah, it'll be 28th. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, and I think the significance, and I think the significance had to do something with the 5th day of the 4th month in here. I can't remember how that worked, but all I know is we also had connected this here, and so there's a whole bunch of stuff I don't remember even, but we had connected this here to a symbol of Millerite history. The 5th day of the 4th month somehow was connected with this 391.5 days. So all I'm saying is that this structure is important, but it's also that we see that June 2017 and 2018 are connected. So that there's this connection that's been happening. And what we're doing is we're walking over fulfilled prophecy. And as we start to see these prophecies fulfilled, they shine back upon the past and give light upon the future. So this is a principle that as we walk through fulfilled prophecy, we're going to have light shining on our path in front of us. So a bunch of things happen regarding this. Now I've shown in other places how I eventually came to July 18th. So July 18th, 2020 has 2 different dates. There's July 31st, 2020. And this one is the 10th day of the 5th month, which I get from Ezekiel. And this one is the 26th day of the 4th month, which I get from Revelation 9, Josiah Litch's prophecy. And I introduce these here for a purpose to try to understand Samuel Snow's letters. So this date of July 18th, this is also July 18th, but Julian, is tied together by these 2 symbols. Ezekiel, I came to understand that Ezekiel typifies snow. And he typifies snow based upon midnight being the 5th day of the 4th month, and the prediction that he's predicting October 22nd, the 10th day of the 7th month. So I know that snow and Ezekiel are connected. What this shows me about this history is that we're connected with Ezekiel and snow. Now we talk about, and I don't know how to basically address this, but we talk about the line of the priests, and the line of the Levites. And so we're going to have to, in the second half here, when we get there, I'm just seeing how much time I've used up. Yeah, exactly what I thought. So we've got an hour and a half. We're going to take a bit of a break. But when we get into the second half here, we're gonna relate this to our history. We're gonna fill this out. So I'm gonna actually end up having to erase this. But what I want to show is that we have started with this history, and we can even go further back, which we do. We can actually connect this structurally back to Jeff's presentation in Glen Park Hall near Warburg or Kalmar, Alberta. We can connect it there. We can even go back further. We can connect this to 2014. We can even go back further. So this is all part of this huge structure that's wheels within wheels. But when we talk about this prediction before midnight, it seems pretty clear to me that this July 18th is the key. It's May 2nd is the key, but July 18th is the key in understanding what our prediction is. It's July 18th. And that comes from Samuel Snow's letters, from the structure of it, and from the way it's fulfilled in Millerite history. Now, this is not yet a study on the Midnight Cry itself. So, and that's what I want to show when we get into our history, when we start to lay out our line again, you'll start to see what part this has to play within the bigger lines, in relationship to the other lines. This is not the line of the priests. This is not the line of the Levites. This is not the line of the 144,000. It's a separate line within our message. And I don't know how to describe it other than to say that within our movement, which is, we say we're in the line of the priests, but there still is this relationship between Snow that doesn't include everyone. That is, it's including, what I would say is and maybe that's not even the word to say everyone, that it's actually about a message that's in our movement rather than a person or a group of people. It's about a message which is about a prediction before midnight. And just like Snow, it's highly neglected. He's not accepted. We know that when he republishes his first letter, it's published with the disclaimer that we don't agree with it, but we're putting it here because it has some interesting information, right? Because they're saying that nothing's going to happen beyond April 19th, and he's saying it's going to happen in the fall, but we're going to still print it just because there's some interesting information. He asked us to reprint it, so we will. So we can see then that, Samuel Snow's message is highly neglected. He's been presenting this message for a long time, but even in this whole time of all of his letters, he's not being recognized. And that's not really going to happen until Exeter. Even in Boston, it's still not recognized. I mean, people understand it, but it's not empowered. And so in trying to understand this, I would just say that this is a message that exists with our movement that has been neglected. It's not about the people presenting the message that somebody is Samuel Snow. It's about the message itself. And I've taken a position where I used to say that this was the priests are the special group that are symbolized by this, but I've come to recognize that can't be the case. I could be wrong, but I've come to the conclusion that there's more to it than that. And I'm not, because I'm starting to refine our lines regarding who the priests are, who the Levites are, and what that means. So hopefully that will make sense after we come back. So we're just going to take a short break, 5 minutes, and then we'll come back to studying this. And you can prepare your questions. I'll open up with questions. Okay. So. Dear Father in heaven, again, we come to you and just ask for your Spirit's presence. Help to keep us awake as we study these things. It's a lot of information. Help our minds to sort through it. Help us to take our time in thinking about these things as we continue to go throughout our day. We pray this and thank you in Jesus' name. Okay, so somebody's asking me to clarify which dates on those calendars is midnight. So I think you're talking about here. Somebody's asking about the dates like May 2nd, how we're marking this line. Is that what you're asking? So in Samuel Snow's letters, the midnight is July 21st. Now, these dates show up in our history in different ways. May 2nd shows up. June 22nd shows up. July 18th, of course, is going to show up. February 22nd shows up. April 3rd doesn't. April 16th, as far as I know, doesn't show up in our history. But February 22nd, April 19th, May 2nd, June 22nd, June 27th, and July 18th all become significant dates in our history in different years, and they're part of this structure. So they become like the center of wheels that exist on these wheels within wheels. And the periods of time are the spans of time between these rotational periods or centers or chiasms. So, and the time of Christ on the cross. So they're asking a bunch of things regarding here. The time of Christ on the cross. He's crucified on April 27th, 31 AD. There's a bunch of this. So we have those in other studies. Up in here in this history, some of these dates on the biblical calendar aren't as significant as others. I know the 5th day of the 4th month was here, and I'm going to address that a little bit more as I'm going to take this history and apply it to Samuel Snow's letters here. So hopefully I can help answer that question. So that was, thanks for that question.
So, recording?
Yeah, I'm recording. Yeah. So now we have another thing that arose in this history. So if you remember, Elder Jeff in 2018 is presenting Samuel Snow's letters. I'm presenting the week of Christ in detail. And I don't have time to go through that now. We have other studies on it. But the significance of the week of Christ was my ability to actually understand much better the biblical dates, because I had worked out all kinds of biblical dates that had to be in order for things to fit together. So they were interdependent dates. And so I came to understand that this was a correct way of looking at it. I could write out then the line of Christ, and I could show the prophetic mirror in the literal week of Christ. I could show the 10th day of the 7th month was 70 AD. And so that became this extremely powerful testimony of that I was doing the dates correctly. So, which I can't do right now, but I have done in other presentations. So, for instance, July 18th is going to be the 2nd day of the 5th month, or the 2nd day of the 4th month, because the 5th day of the 4th month is July 18th. This is the 6th day of the 3rd month. This is the 11th day of the 3rd month. This is the 14th day of the 1st month, 1st day of the 1st month, 14th day of the 1st month. These ones here are already explained. So when we get up into this history, the main thing is not so much the biblical dates, even though we can line them up in places here and there, such as Pentecost, such as the 5th day of the 4th month. What becomes more significant are the symbols and the dates on our calendar. November 9th is an extremely powerful symbol. November 9th is when the pilgrims first saw Cape Cod. That's when they see the Promised Land. We can also connect this to other dates in other histories. October 13th, the fall of Babylon, the miracle of Fatima. All these dates start to have these connections that have a lot of significance that we're not going to be able to address here today. But what happened when I had come to this 10th day of the 5th month, July 18th, using Ezekiel, is that I then realized that if I went to Samuel Snow's letters and I was going to count from this letter, June 22nd, to July 18th, I could do it as 391.5 days. That is, in 1844, if I count 391.5 days from June 22nd, I will arrive at July 18th, 1845. And that's from the simple reason that from June 22nd to July 18th is how many days? It's 20, can't remember how many days. It's 25 days, something like that. Anyway, it ends up being, so 20, so that's 30, so that's 8. Yeah, it's 25 days. And if you add 25 days to 365, you get 25. It must be 26 days. Anyway, however you count it, it ends up working out. If you go from noon on June 22nd, you'll arrive at midnight commencing July 18th. So I just did the same thing. So when I did that, and I've shown this other places, what I recognized is that there was this other chiasm in Samuel Snow's letters. That is, this structure here that we see from June 9th to October 13th also existed in Samuel Snow's letters. Now, one of the things you would see here, that I'm just going to erase this here, is that I originally ignored this 126 days, and I wanted a period of 6 days here because I wanted to see a period of 120 days. Now, the 120 days comes from Saul, David, and Solomon, and then 391.5 years to Zedekiah. So this is 1097, this is 977, and then this is 586. And this is 391 and a half years for the kings of the divided Judah, divided Israel. Judah and Israel are divided. And this is 120 years because there's 40 years each. And so what I came to realize is that I could count 120 days. And this is where I came to the 5th day of the 4th month, I think on the rabbinic calendar. But the other thing about this 120 days then is when you look at Samuel Snow's letters, you see this period here from June 22nd, from here to here, is a period of 126 days. And that the center of this period of 126 days is April 19th. So this is 63 days. And then from April 19th to June 26th is 63 days. So I have this same structure. But more than that, if I looked at August 11th here, Julian, it's going to be the same as April 19th and May 2nd. It's going to have that same relationship in the span of time. I'm also going to have these 6 days here that are here. So I have 6 days. So I have that part of that structure. April 3rd lines up with July 27th. So I'll do it this way. I'll write this as June 9th. This is June 15th. This is lining up with July 27th. And this is lining up with August 11th, Gregorian. And May 2nd lines up with August 11th, Julian. And then June 22nd lines up with October 13th. And then July 18th lines up with November 9th. And so what we recognized, and what Jeff recognized too when it was presented, and it was recognized when I was presenting it, not before, is that there was this structure in Samuel Snow's letters that we had not noticed before, and that there was a second chiasm, and that this second chiasm went to, and did I do this right? Yeah, June 22nd all the way to June 9th. And then also we could add this as well, the November 9th part, even though it's got a year less or a year more, depending which way you're looking at it. So Samuel Snow's letters can just be laid over top of this part of this structure all the way going to November 9th. But that end date here is July 18th. So what that does is it ties July 18th to November 9th as a symbol. So that means they're part of the same structure and they're related to each other. Now we also recognize that there was 252 days between the July 18th, that's the 26th day of the 4th month, and this created this whole other structure, which we're not going to address right now. I can't present everything. So my point is that there's this history that we went through in 2018 that pointed to November 9th, and that Millerite history testifies of this history in the structure of Samuel Snow's letters. But it also testifies to this date as well, the July 18th, whether you're looking at either one of them. So hopefully that jump, all of a sudden we just have this jump of how all this information ties together. And you may not see it, or you may not see the significance of it. You may not remember all the details regarding it, but to me, it is extremely significant. Now, that these structures can be laid over top of each other. Now, sometimes they're a day off because you have to count ordinally or cardinally, so that can confuse you if you look at it. But, and that's because ordinal and cardinal shows up in this line, whether you count from June 10th or June 9th. And, you know, this June 15th date, which ends up being the 5th day of the 4th month, is the one that's 391.5 if you look at the Julian date representation. Somebody has a question. She just says thank you. That's the question I was asking. So thanks for pointing that out. So I want this to sink in a little bit because, you know, because I'm going to have to erase it, but I'm still going to have to refer back to it. But I really want to put the line, I want to line up the Millerite line with our line in a little larger way to try to understand, because I know our line is not well understood, because we know there's this line of the priests. We know there's this line of the Levites. There's questions, at least in my mind, regarding how we apply the line of the Nethinim. And then we also have this line of Samuel Snow's letters and trying to fit that line into what has happened in this movement and to try to say, well, is Samuel Snow just the priests, or is Samuel Snow something else within the movement? And I'm always going to argue against it being a person or even a group of people, because it's not about a person, it's about a message. And this is the message which is, I believe, the prediction before midnight. That is a line within our movement that we have ignored. And we've ignored it because it was rejected. It wasn't accepted. And we'll see that when it's accepted at the right time within our line to match up with what happened in Millerite history. So I'm going to have to try to explain this in the simplest way that I can. So let's see if I can do it. So you got this all in your mind. Don't forget it. And yeah, you're going to have to, I know many of you are going to have to go over these things again. For now, I'll leave this up here, though I'm going to have to erase it. But I'm going to refer to it a little bit as I draw our line, but I'm going to have to then draw the Millerite line again. So in trying to understand our line, we know we have a period of darkness, which is in the 4th generation, and we have 1989 and 9/11, and we're going to have more things on our line, a lot of detail in here. Now, from 1989 to 9/11, just as in Millerite history, we had the increase of knowledge. You know, we had a formalization of the message. We choose, and there's different ways in which we could look at this history. You know, different ways we can look at these dates. You know, we're going to have the formalization in 1996 with the publication of the Time of the End magazine. And when we look at Millerite history, So I'm just going to erase this part for now down here. When we look at Millerite history, we know we have, 1798. So I'm just going to, maybe I'll just write the dates up here. 1798. And then we're going to have August 11th, 1840. So I'll just put August 11th, put 1840. So August 11th, 1840 is the empowerment of the first angel's message. And in our line, we can say that 9/11 is the empowerment of the first angel's message. These two go together, August 11th and 9/11. But in Millerite history, you don't have the second angel arrive until April 19th. So I'm just going to put April 19th up here. I'll do it this way for now. So we can see these two dates, which are separate dates in Millerite history, in our history are the same event, 9/11. And we say that April 19th is the arrival of the second angel's message. And this is what we're really addressing today. So we're going to address the second angel's message, so I'm going to sort of look ahead and see how we fit this in. Now, as time went on, we came to recognize that there was these fractals, as we called them, or that there was a three-step testing prophetic message that was testing different groups of people. And in trying to understand this, I'm just going to have to erase this because I'm going to have to go get the Millerite line up here to understand this. So in the Millerite line, of course, we're going to have all the same things, 1798. We're going to have, I'll just put here, August 11th, 1840. And then we're going to have April 19th. (1844). Now, in understanding this history here, we know that this is the empowerment of the message, and we have talked about it in other places where they believed that this was the midnight cry. And this is the way that Elder Jeff originally introduced this idea, is because he came to recognize that this was the midnight cry to the Millerites, but it was testing Protestants. And then, but we recognize that the true midnight cry is going to come after this. And so just to sort of line this up, we're going to have July 21st, which is the 5th day of the 4th month. Right? This is the first day of the 1st month. And then we're going to have August 15th, which is the first day of the 5th month. And then we're going to have the 10th day of the 7th month, which is October 22. So we have this history, and all Samuel Snow's letters are addressing a history before July 21st, what I call the prediction before midnight. So now there's this separation of these two classes. We have Protestants, and now we're going to have Millerites. Millerites are going to be tested, and they're tested here with the second angel's message. The third angel's message arrives, is also the completion of the second angel, right? So the second angel's all through this history. Now, in a sense, you can also argue to a large degree that the first angel is also through this history. The second angel joins it, and then finally the third angel joins it. And when we look at this line on a big way, I'm just going to draw this whole big line. We have 1798 here. So you got the first angel, you got 1844, April 19th. That's the arrival of the second angel. And then you're going to have October 22nd, 1844. And this is going to be the arrival of the third angel. Now, the third angel arrives in all kinds of histories. Whenever we go through any of these lines in the past, you have the third angel arriving, or the third message, the third way mark of a reform line. These have empowerments, but the third is never empowered. It arrives, and then what will happen is a fourth angel will join it. And we saw that in the story of Ezra. You have 3 decrees and then the 4th decree. And the 4th angel, when it arrives, it's meant to empower it. So, and the 4th angel is the 2nd angel. So in our history, when we line up 1989, and I'm not even dealing with the 3rd angels, when we get into the 3rd angel, you'll see what I mean, because I'm not going to really address it here completely. But, we're going to have, again, the 1st angel is going to arrive at the time of the end. And then we're going to have an arrival of the 2nd angel. And the 2nd angel arrives at 9/11. Now, the 2nd angel is also the 4th angel. Now, in Millerite history, there was also an arrival of the 4th angel that happened. So I'm not going to address that right now as well. Because, well, maybe I will. I'll address it this way. We know that when you have the first 3 decrees, they start the 2300 days. And then there's, in 444 BC, you have the story of Nehemiah with the 4th angel, or the 2nd decree of Artaxerxes. You sometimes call it Nehemiah's decree. And in that history, they build the streets and walls. And in that history, there's always a building that goes on, but it's the first generation. And you then have a progressive destruction of 4. And then what you get is finally, you're going to have a reform line again, but it's going to be a major reform line, and that's the reform line of Christ. The line of Christ, that reform line, which is going to introduce this new reform line that's going to test, again, 2 groups of people. So I'm not going to even go into that reform line now. The point is, this is what happens in our history. You have this history, you have this mini reform line here in 1863, basically from 1850 to 1888. It's in the first generation, they're tested. And then when you get to our history, this is now in the 4th generation, you're again going to have a reform line. And that's what this reform line is it's a parallel to this chain where you have a reform line falling away, a progressive destruction of 4, and then a major reform line again. The reform line in 444 that starts the 2300 days, and the reform line in 1863 after the end of the 2300 days, is what I call a failed reform line. It is, there is a reform line, but there's also a failure attached to it. And that failure becomes the seed that by the 4th generation becomes the period of darkness. Because you always have a reform line that's preceded by darkness. The reform line addresses that darkness. You go through that reform. That reform, in a sense, is complete. But then a new element happens in the 1st generation after the 3rd angel arrives. And so that message is never really empowered in the way that it should be. It is empowered to some degree. The streets and walls get built. God gets a denominated people in 1863. So there's a completion. But with that, there's always a failure. And that failure becomes the seed that's going to grow into this error where you need another major reform line. Now, Ellen White says that the 3rd angel goes all along this history, and that in Revelation 18, you're going to have another angel join. So what you end up having is you have this other angel join, which way you want to draw the arrow, which is the 2nd angel. It's called the other angel. We sometimes call it the 4th angel, but really it's the 2nd angel, because this angel here, and we're going to address this part not so much today. We're going to actually have to do it next time, where we really address what happened with the 2nd angel and try to understand the 2nd angel better. Because I don't think I have enough time to really address it. I can just point to it that the 2nd angel has to be with Babylon is fallen is fallen. And we know that Ellen White says that Protestantism fell in 1844. But there's a difference between the 2nd angel and the 4th, and that the angel says, Babylon is fallen, come out of her, my people. She says that over time, more of these sins have accumulated in Protestantism, and that it experiences a complete and final fall, where here it's just a partial fall. And I'm going to address this in a lot more detail in the next study, because I really want to to nail down the significance of the second angel's message, what it means to us in this time, because I think that that's not fully understood again. And part of it is we've had to sort out the precious and the vile. We've had a lot of errors come in, and I don't think that we've sorted through some of these errors that have come into this message, knowing where they came from, because they were mixed with truth. Truth and error mixed together. One is to make the error more palatable. The other is to bury that truth so that we will throw out the baby with the bathwater. So anyway, we have here, this third angel is continuing all through this history. Third angel has not stopped. And if you really look at it, you can actually see that the third angel's message has continued, and it's continued from Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, because that's the third angel's message in that history, is Genesis, because it's connected, of course, to the message of righteousness by faith, but to the gospel, to the everlasting gospel. So the third angel is tied to that. It's not that in and of itself. If you were to argue that the third angel's message is just righteousness by faith, you're misusing spirit of prophecy to do that. It's part of it, but there's a part of the third angel that we don't realize, is that it's always tied to rebellion. And that part of it has often been ignored. And it's very, very interesting that Parminder, when he was at my house and we did a study, he presented Genesis chapter 3 and showed that the two classes of worshipers is there in Genesis 3. I don't know if you remember that. It was a very profound study. And that's why I always wonder why he ended up bringing up things that were correct, but misusing them. So he misused that study to further his agenda. But it was powerful because it was true. And so we have to be really careful also in trying to separate the precious and the vile, to know that just because something was true doesn't mean it was all true. There could be error there that's being planted for us as well. Sure, I can see how he misused it, but maybe I don't see everything. And so it's important for us as a people to study these things out and to come to a correct understanding of them. One person can't do it. But the point that I want to say is that the third angel, and we're going to see this, we're going to study the third angel. We're going to go to Genesis chapter 3, and we're going to show how the third angel continues all the way through. And it's not empowered at any time from Genesis until the final generation. And we'll see what happens when the third angel is empowered. And we can probably guess when that is, that the third angel is empowered. So as far as the third angel is arriving, people have argued that the third angel arrives here at 9/11. So the second angel arrives and the third angel. But these to me were sort of meaningless things because they weren't well defined. I mean, you could just say, well, the first angel arrives here and the second angel arrives and the third angel arrives, or they're all together here. But if you don't know what they are, how can you say that they're there? You would have to understand what it is that has arrived. And you need to understand what it means when it's formalized. And you need to understand what it means when it's empowered in order to place those in time. And so we were kind of willy-nilly mixing all these different symbols, not really understanding what we were doing. We weren't very clear. We weren't very well defined. And we were being asked questions that were confusing us rather than clarifying things. So truth would be brought in, but it'd be mixed with error, and it was mixed with a bunch of questions that then never allowed us to resolve these things. It left us in a state of unresolved ideas. That is a very dangerous thing. You need to resolve ideas. You don't want to have a bunch of cognitive dissonance. It needs to be harmonized. And that's what chronology has done, is it's helped pull all these things together and to see the order that God has. So we're going to look at that. We're going to look at the third angel's message. I'm not sure when that's going to be, probably 2 weeks from now, that we'll spend more time studying that. Because I do want to look at the history of Jones and Wagner in 1888. I do want to show my experience in years and years of study of Jones and Wagner and why I've come to the same conclusion that Jeff has regarding 1888, which was not the initial conclusion that I had when I was first studying it. and to show you how that message has never been accepted, and it's because of rebellion. So the other thing that we're going to try to do now that I want to finish off is I want to address these lines. So now we know that we have this line that we had begun. And many of you may know when we first, this message first defined these lines, you would have the time of the end. You would have, I'm trying to remember what happened. I think there would just be, I know we'd have the Sunday law and the close of probation. I think that was a very early line that Jeff would have used. You can see in here, there isn't the midnight cry, there isn't midnight, there isn't 9/11, right? Because this is before 9/11. So as time went on, this line changed once 9/11 was understood, and the line looked like this. So the Sunday law lines up with the close of probation. But, this is a fractal within the bigger line. That is, you still see the 3 steps, but a different group of people is being tested here. And as time went on, we then, expanded this line even more because, I'm just going to erase it, because then you could put 9/11 here, you could put the Sunday law here, and then you could put the midnight cry here. So, and then what we did is we added midnight. So the line evolved from a bigger line to a smaller line, but we still hadn't really defined the groups of people that were being tested. I mean, to some degree, we recognize the Sunday law is testing Seventh-day Adventists. So we would say that this is SDAs. And then after the Sunday law, you have a close of probation, and this would be the world, right? And Parminder came in and really tried to disrupt this. And he did it in a very clever way. So, it's interesting how he did it. Now, part of it was again, he was using some truths, but he was also mixing it with error. Now, I'm going to try to explain this the best I can, but we know we have these lines. And these lines we would call the priests, the Levites, and the Nethinim. And the priests, Levites, and Nethinims, we would look at, these are Seventh-day Adventists, and this is the world. But the thing about the Nethinim and where we were placing it is we were placing the Nethinim before the Sunday law. So that is, and we used different illustrations. One was the agricultural model. The agricultural model dealt with the plowing. There's also the temple, the building of the temple model. So you could use that as a model. And there was, what's the other model? Remind me what the other model was. The agricultural, the temple, and
places like geography.
Geography? Okay.
As one as you can.
And how would you describe it then, other than geography? Because that's the one I haven't seen really presented too often. I know that it was there.
I'm just thinking about, we have the story of between the glorious holy mountain, between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. You have that aspect. But there was 4. I think there was agricultural, building, construction, and
Construction is building, yeah. Agriculture.
Yeah.
I can't remember. Anyway, so we used different models, and the different models told us things. But part of the problem that I had is I didn't see this line.
Marriage,
right, marriage. Yeah, marriage. That was the other one. And we could even put in the Sabbath there, kind of connected with it to some degree, I think. It was marriage and Sabbath that were connected. But anyway, I came to recognize that I had problems with the line of the Nephilim. That is, this to me, the priests and Levites are Seventh-day Adventists. But what we have to recognize which group is being tested. And to say SDAs in the world, well, I think we could divide SDAs into two groups, priests and Levites. That is, you have the people who are receiving a message and going to give a message, and then these people are going to receive that message, and then they're going to give that message. Now, and I don't know exactly how this works. So, but I'll tell you what I think was the problem. I think the problem was we mixed the lines up all the time. Now, what Parminder tried to do is he tried to get us to recognize that the Sunday law is in the line of the priests a different waymark, and that he would mark it with midnight. So he would say that midnight is the Sunday law, and for the line of the priests, this would be, obviously 2001, this would be 2014. This we came to recognize was 2018. And then the Sunday law, of course, which they now reject, the Sunday law would have been the close of probation, which we would then mark as November 9th for the priests, or even a period of time earlier, right? So before the Sunday law. So you'd have November 9th. So this became a little bit muddy because when we talk about November 9th, that's midnight for the Levites. And then when we talk about midnight cry for the Levites, when is that? So there was this confusion that was still happening. Even though he was trying to define this, I felt that he was defining it incorrectly. And I'm not sure exactly how to sort that out. But what I would say is that this is SDAs, and that SDAs are going to be tested at the Sunday law. But there is going to be another group of people. So if I'm going to put the Nethinim back in there, the Nethinim represents something else. They don't represent the world. They would represent Protestants. So these are SDAs. And these are Protestants who join the SDAs. Now, there was this suggestion that the Nethinim are the 11th hour workers. But if you look in this line, we know that there's going to be 11th hour workers all along the way. They're within a group of people of the priests, there's going to be 11th hour workers. There's going to be people who are priests who come in before the close of probation for the priests. You know the same with the Levites. Groups of people come in at the last minute. So with the Nethinims, this would just be another group of people which we would call the Protestants. Now, in my study on the joining of the two sticks, I've argued that what we get is we get SDAs and Protestants joining together, because this is northern Israel, which is Ephraim, and this is southern Israel, which is Judah. And Judah and Ephraim are going to be joined together in our history. So I did that in the study on the separation and joining of the two sticks. And I believe that that comes before the Sunday law. And that Protestants are not, that these Nethinim, in order for a Protestant to be saved, I'm not saying that Protestants can't come in later, but for those Protestants that understand that the Catholic Church is the Antichrist, they may not understand the Saturday Sabbath issue, but before we come to this Sunday law, they are going to understand it, and they would join with us and stand in the Sunday law, because the joining of the two sticks has to occur. Now, this is another study, of course, but we know that the first stick fell, or the first horn fell, pardon me, in April 19th, 1844. And we know that that horn is going to fall again. Protestants are going to be the ones who actually give, they're behind the Sunday law. And so when the Protestants enforce Sunday, there has to be a group of Protestants that's going to stand out. And those are the Protestants that are represented by the Nethinim. The Nethinim, these are the group of people who work in the temple, but they're not Jews. And they would be symbolized by the Protestants, in my thinking. So there's one of the problems. We have a problem in understanding these lines and where these lines start and end. I have no problem with an agricultural model or a building model. It's how it was applied. And it was inconsistent. And it was built upon some false premises. And one of the premises was that we're going to form this group, the priests are, that are going to call Seventh-day Adventists into this church. And we will be the priests over these Levites. And that this group of priests were going to form the only ones who would be the 144,000. So this is what was being taught. So you have this group of priests, which is in their minds not a literal number, but a symbolic number, and that they're the only ones that are 144,000. The problem that I had is that we have a line of the 144,000. So we have a line of the 144,000, but we have these priests separate out of it. And yet you're just going to skip over and say, you're going to finally have this group, the 144,000, over here. Let's put it that way. These are the people who are in the time of Jacob's trouble. And yet these are only from this group here, not from this group. And that's where I have a problem. To me, the 144,000 represent this group. Even the Nethinim can't be part of the 144,000 because they're not from the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And so this group here, even though they receive the seal of God, they're not virgins, right? Spiritually speaking. They still will have retained some of their errors, even though they may be martyrs and die for the truth. And then we also know that there's the world. Well, the world is divided into two groups to some degree, Protestants and everything else, which would be atheists, Buddhists, Hindus, maybe you would even include the Muslims in there, just all kinds of different religions, people with all kinds of different beliefs, but yet Catholics I would include in that class as well. And that group of people will then, many of them will come and stand with God's people and become martyrs. They may not know the doctrines, they may not know all the arguments, but they know the difference between right and wrong. And they know that it's wrong to be killing people over this issue. And so many of those people will stand with God's people. And how much and in order to have that faith, they have to have some relationship with God in some way. May not be the way that we would have it, but it's going to be that they're going to stand for the truth. That's the way that I look at it. Now, I could be wrong, so I'm not saying this in an adamant way that I'm correct. But it seems to me, based on everything I've read in the Bible and the Spirit of Prophecy, that during the time of the loud cry, that there are many types of people coming in to be martyrs, to stand. And that the issues have to be so clear that when the probation comes, the close of probation, those that are left alive, who have received the seal of God, those are the 144,000. And that group of people will then go through this testing time called the time of Jacob's trouble, go through the plagues, and then you'll have the second coming. So I haven't completed this yet, because we're going to see how this relates. But the only thing that I can do at this time, for the amount of time we have. What's that?
Eric said, we'll go through the plagues, but we will be protected.
Yes. Yeah, so we'll go through the plagues, 144,000. We'll go through the plagues, but protected. But they still have to go through the time of Jacob's trouble, which Ellen White says that most things, difficulties in anticipation are not as bad as you imagine, but the time of Jacob's trouble is worse than anything that we can imagine. We can't imagine that agony because it's a mental anguish. It's an experience that we go through that parallels Jesus' death on the cross. The very words that Jesus cries from the cross, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Those same words will be uttered by the 144,000 as they feel that complete separation from God. So what I can do now, so I'm going to sort of back up a little bit. So we have this big line, and I drew it up there, but I probably should have just drawn it here. So we have 9/11, And we know that we're going to end up here at the second coming. And we know here we're going to have the time of Jacob's trouble. Time of Jacob's trouble. And then, so obviously before that we have the close of probation. And we know that the plagues are going to happen here as well. And we know that we're going to have a Sunday law. We put the Sunday law here. And we know we're going to have this loud cry. But sometimes we put it as a waymark, a separate waymark. But it is definitely a period of time. And we know that the second angel arrives here in, so I'm going to put this down here. So the second angel arrives, and it joins the third. And that has happened. So we've been under the proclamation of the third angel's message. And we're going to deal with that message. And then we did read, I believe, at one time, I'm not sure if it was last week or in another study, but we read the second angel's message, and we're all familiar with it. And we read the fourth angel's message in Revelation 18. And there are similarities and there are differences. And one of the big differences is, of course, with the second angel's message between the fourth, is that there isn't the call to come out of her, my people. That happens in this history. But the second angel arrives, but there's obviously this message. The second angel arrives is not the end of the second angel's message. It has to become formalized, and it also has to be empowered. And that's something that I think is not very clear, has not been clear to me in this message of how that occurs, because we've left out that formalization and empowerment part of these things. We just look at these messages arriving for the most part. So we're going to have to deal with that in more detail. What I want to address here right now is this line of the priests. So we would just say, normally, the line of the priest begins here. This is the time of the end. And sometimes, we talk about there's a plowing period and so forth. I think that those things can be misleading if they're not applied correctly. But we do know that God is laying a foundation here in this. We have an increase of knowledge. We have a formalization of the message. And in our history, the difference between Millerite history and ours is that the second angel arrives at the time that the first angel is empowered. And the reason why that occurs is because the second angel, when it arrives in our history, it is arriving for a different reason than it arrived in Millerite history. This is just a partial fall, right here. In this history, Protestantism has fallen even farther. But this message needs to be developed and understood. And so if we look on the big line, we would say that the third angel, if you have a line, you're going to have the first angel arrive, the second angel arrive. So let's just deal with it that way. And then you would have the third angel arrive. But in our history, the third angel is already here. And in a sense, the third angel is always there in every history because it begins from the beginning when it first comes, because it's never resolved. That's why these reform lines continue over and over again, because it's all about the development of the gospel, which is the third angel's message. So, when we try to put the third angel arrived here, that didn't make sense to me because it's the second angel is joining, or the other angel, the fourth angel, if you want to put it that way, is joining the third, and it's going to empower it, and it's going to swell to a loud cry. So we know that this history is happening this way. But then when we want to say, well, when is the second angel formalized? Well, first, you have to define what the second angel's message is. And then when is it empowered? So in Millerite history, the way that we would look at it, I would think, is that we would look at, we would take midnight and the midnight cry. So let's put midnight and the midnight cry. We put them here before the Sunday law. So this is Jeff's line. This is the line we had in 2016. It's really addressing Seventh-day Adventists. And And then we came to accept that this was 2014. This was the prediction that Parminder made regarding a Sunday law where he was in error. But he was right about something, because 1888, which is 126 years before 2014, is about rebellion. And Elder Jeff has pointed out that in 2014, that's when the rebellion began in this movement and all these people started to leave. So in 2014, we have this rebellion, and this has continued up until 2019. Now, then we had the Midnight Cry. We would say that this was 2018. Now, people in the new movement will argue it's October 3rd, if they still even believe in the Midnight Cry. But we would actually mark it October 13th, 2018. And I would also mark this October 22nd, 2014, for a reason I'm not going to go into right now, but this is in the camp meeting in 2014. This is a camp meeting that I'm at, presenting chronology, and Jeff is presenting about this rebellion that had happened. So this is in the middle of the week. This is the Wednesday. So I'm going to mark this. Then October 13th, 2018 is when the Midnight Cry happened. But this would be for a group that we would call the priests. So when the priest's probation is going to close, according to our understanding of it, it's going to close at a point of time that we'll call November 9th, 2019. So this is a close of probation. Well, this is obviously not the Sunday law. This is something that precedes the Sunday law. November 9th has already passed. And so I'm introducing the problems here. I'm not going to be able to solve it all. But I want you to see clearly that this is the line that Parminder presented for the priests. And then what they would do is they would, I'm just going to move this over with the loud cry here. They would then have Paneum. Now Paneum is, they call this Raphia, and there would be this thing Paneum. And if you think about it, Paneum is the second coming, because you have, if you're going to look at this in Millerite history, this is April 19th. This is the tarrying time. This is July 21st. That's midnight. This is the Midnight Cry. November 9th was the close of probation for the priests, for the false priests. And then Paneum, or Paneum, is going to be a parallel to the second coming. It's not going to be, now we mark this as another line, which is the line of the Levites. That is, Raphia and Paneum are what we also call, so I'm just going to draw the Levites under here. We would call this midnight, and this the Midnight Cry, right? Because Raphia is supposed to be midnight, Paneum is supposed to be Midnight Cry. So that means we would have started their line in a different spot than ours. 9/11 would end up being their time of the end. But it becomes a bit problematic here in trying to line these lines up the way Parminder wanted us to. Because then we would have to move this over. We would have to say that this is 9/11. But we have a hard time placing this as far as if you're looking at the line of the Levites. So this doesn't make sense to me. And I'm not sure that I have a solution to it completely. But part of the problem is that we recognize is that these lines are confusing. They're confusing because Jeff, it's not his fault necessarily, but he looked at Sunday law as the close of probation. But if you take this part of this line here, that's the close of probation for the priests. But we now see that Parminder, for the priest, he's moved the Sunday law over to here. So this becomes the Sunday law, so to speak, which is midnight. So he parallels midnight with the Sunday law. So if you're going to look at the next group, the Nethinim, you would have to put their midnight at the Sunday law itself. So there just becomes a lot of these And maybe people think I just don't understand the lines properly, because I've often said I don't. And when I say that, I understand what people teach. I don't understand the consistency, the inconsistencies. And I also think that there's just, we force the lines to fit our scenario. And we need to be able to understand Millerite history properly in order to understand that. So then what I'm saying then is when we start to look at these lines, and this is what we'll look at next week, when we look at Millerite history, when we start to study the second angel's message, we need to know what it is. And then only then can we apply it to our history. And then we also need to recognize what group we're applying it to and why we're applying it to that group. So here would be a problem and this problem is kind of created because we mix these two together. We mix the first day of the first month and August 11th together in our history. That creates a problem. It creates a problem regarding to who the groups of people are that are being tested. That is, if this is 9/11, then whose probation, which group has failed their test? And how would we parallel that with the Protestants? And then if we're going to take this line here, well, we now have not just Protestants and Millerites, we have the Seventh-day Adventist Church, we have priests, we have Levites, we have Nethinims, we have this thing called the world. And so we have all these different groups of people that are being tested. But the thing is, we fail to recognize that there is another line in here, which is Samuel Snow. And so when we try to look at where Samuel Snow fits into here, we haven't really addressed that issue because we've seen him as must be a person. But it is a message, and that message is the prediction before midnight. And so that's what I think if we apply this, if we look at Millerite history correctly, we should be able to sort out this line. We should be able to see where we are in this line and understand some things about this line, because we know there's things about this line that are wrong. I mean, for instance, if you look at what Parminder said, he says November 9th is Raphia, which they were looking for a war between the king of the north and the king of the south, where the king of the south would win, and then you would come here and you have a battle between the king of the north and the king of the south again, and the king of the north would win. But we don't see that here in this history. So that means there's a mistake that was made. And if we know that there was a mistake, I don't see why we should cling to everything that was said, or if we're not, but we have to know which things that were taught were error. And Elder Jeff has done a good job of pointing out that there are different groups that have experienced these closes of probation. The United States is one group. Trump has a line. The priests and the Levites also have lines. But we're still going to have to sort that out. So hopefully, I think people can see the problem a little bit better. At least I see the problem better every time I look at it. The solution, to be careful, I don't think I have the solution. I'm not saying I know how this is all going to pan out. But I at least know, I think, where we are, because I can look at Samuel Snow's letters, and I can tell you where we are in Samuel Snow's letters. And that means we're before what is midnight in Millerite history. That is, we're before July 21st. Now, if we say that November 9th is Raphia, and I'm not saying it doesn't serve that purpose in some level. But I would say that it's actually the separation that happened in November 9th is much more typified by the separation that happened in Samuel Snow's letters. And so that's as far as I can go without going on and on and on and on, talking about this. So any questions, anything that you think that I've made a mistake or anything that you need clarified, I'd be happy to hear from people. There's quite a few people here. Somebody must have an opinion about something. So just either hit your space bar or turn on your volume if you want to say something. Maybe there's somebody who just wants to send it as a.
Well, I have something there in chat, but that might get us off on another long study. So I think I'll just pass on it.
Well, you're dealing with the temple being finished. So that is actually a really important point. And I think the temple is a really important part of Samuel Snow's letters. Because when we looked at Samuel Snow's letters, we said that the publishment of his first letter was on a date for the dedication of the temple. And then, of course, it's republished on the Passover. And the dedication of the temple precedes the Passover. And the whole other line that we're forgetting about is the priests and the Levites from 2 Chronicles 29 and 30, where the priest cleansed the temple for 8 days, and then the Levites follow for 8 days cleaning the courtyard. And that period of 16 days, what it symbolizes, but also the 8 and the 8. So there's a whole bunch of things that we haven't even addressed. We haven't addressed the temple. And I think it's actually the most important line. It's the thing that actually helps us sort it out. Because we know that Millerite history is about the cleansing of the heavenly sanctuary. To try to apply the agricultural line to me, it's the same thing as when you try to apply, excuse me, Psalm 23 and force everything into Psalm 23. So we know that there was a group of people, couple, who were using Psalm 23 and trying to get everything to fit into it. But to me, the agricultural model creates the same problem. It's an illustration, it has a purpose, but it can't supersede the main symbol, which has to do with the temple itself. And we know if we go to the beginning of the 2300 days, it's about the return of the people, the cleansing of the temple, the rebuilding of the temple. All these things are connected to the beginning of the 2300 days that ends with the cleansing of the heavenly sanctuary, and the 46 years from 1798 to 1844 that addresses the building of the temple, God's establishing a people. And so what we see when we look at our line is we should see that construction model, the foundation. Now, there's also some confusion was brought in regarding pillars and things like that, that I think was an error. But we still need to look at the fact that God is building a temple, and that the 144,000 are the priests and the Levites in that temple. They're the ones that serve in that temple. And so in order to understand this line, we need to understand that part of it. So that was just, addressing that question. Anyone else, any thoughts, objections, questions? Okay, Erica, you have a
Do
question?
you actually believe that 144,000 is a literal number or a symbolic number?
Okay, the question is from the floor here. Is the 144,000 symbolic or literal? Now, we addressed that a little bit before, but I believe that it's a literal number, because Ellen White says when the number, 144,000 in number, and when that number is made up, she talks about the number being made up is the number that God has arbitrarily chosen to represent him. He's chosen 12 people or 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes of Israel. All these different character traits of people with different experiences, different personalities. And he's chosen 12,000 of those different groups and had them go through an experience to vindicate his character. And it makes no sense to me to apply that as symbolic. There's a symbolic aspect to the number, but the number itself must be literal to have any meaning in the context of the Great Controversy. And we'll see that when we go through the three angels' messages, how that number is developed, because it's developed throughout history. You have the seed of the woman, we're going to deal with that, and we're going to see that seed, that number is the number that God has chosen to represent him. So it goes all through all the covenant promises. It goes through all the history. So it's not just some arbitrary number. I use the word arbitrary. It's not arbitrary in the sense that God has, he's chosen it. It's arbitrary in that sense. But God has it expressed throughout history of why it needs to be literal. And if you were to take it as symbolic, you can easily just take every number as symbolic and say that the 2300 days didn't really mean anything. The Millerites were wrong about their dates and about what they were teaching. They should have realized it was a symbolic number. Many Seventh-day Adventists take that position, that the 2300 days should not have been understood as a literal period of time. They do that with the 12-6 day. They do that with the 70 weeks. They say that we were wrong about all these times and all these dates. They're all just symbolic. The 70 years, when we studied that, it was taken, that's just symbolic. There was no literal 70 years. And so you run down a pretty dangerous track when you try to take a number and just say it's symbolic. That it's only symbolic, that it's not also literal. And we had this discussion too, that I still think that we have to look at pretty much everything in the Bible. All the numbers have a literal component to them, even if they have a symbolic reason for their existence. When the 153 fish were taken, by Peter, the disciples. When I was dealing with Samuel Snow's letters, I didn't deal with the fact of what the 153 is, and we're gonna look at that as we go along as well. But it was the number of days from the writing of his first letter to the publishment of his July 18th letter was 153 days inclusive. So 153rd day was when from writing of his first letter as day one. And now you could count them as periods of 77. No, it wouldn't be inclusive, it would be cardinal. And if you count inclusively, it's 77 days and 77 days. From February 16th, February 16th to May 2nd is 77 days, if you count this as day one. And then to July 18th is also 77 days, but this is cardinal. Altogether, if you count cardinally, it's 153. If you count ordinal, it's 154. And this is a symbol of prophesying again. It also has a glorious manifestation of the power of God attached to it. But when the 153 fishes are drawn out, Jesus tells them that they have to go and give a message again. They have to become fishers of men again. It's a second call. And so they're going to now have to repeat their message. And we will see that becomes a symbol in our history as well, the 153. The fact that we have a message that has to be repeated is not often understood. So anyway, that's kind of an aside, but something that I left out. So anyway, I think that's probably enough for everybody's brain. And I want you to spend some time studying these things. Somebody else have a comment? I heard a mic rustle. Somebody probably just has their mic on. So I want you to think about these things over the next week. The video will be up later today, maybe tonight. If you need to watch it over again, that's fine. There's somebody who told me that they actually watch my videos twice, because first they want to go to get to my conclusion, and then when they watch it the second time, they notice things in it that they wouldn't have noticed. They catch on to my points better. But I do try to tell people what I'm going to say, so that they don't always have to watch it a second time. But we probably need to watch it a second time, or present it to somebody. Present Samuel Snow's letters to somebody, a friend, spouse, anybody really, and try to get this down in your mind. So if there's no final comments, we can close with prayer. And let's do that. I know there's probably a few chat things that I missed, but dear Father in heaven, we are thankful for the light that has been shining upon our path, even though we know that it's much more than we can take in. We pray that you will continue to lead and guide your people. Thank you for those that have participated. We know, Lord, that these things are really hard to understand. It's a lot of information, but you can help us. Help us to have a clear mind. Help us to be faithful in our prayer life and our study life. Help us to be obedient in all the things that we do, that we can reflect your character. And we pray for this movement and the people involved in it. We know, Lord, that it's not about the message without the people. That there's people, precious souls, who are looking for truth. And we pray, Lord, that you can lead them and direct them and guide them. Thank you for hearing our prayer. And we pray and thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. So I'll just turn off the recording.